digital device when the chairman opens the floor for public comment. Roll call. Ms. Fashich.
Here.
Mr. McDonald.
Here.
Mr. Butler.
Here.
Mr. Scown is absent. Mr. Bush.
Here.
Ms. Reese.
Here.
Mr. D'Ambrosia.
Here.
Mr. Costa.
Here.
And the chair is present. Approval of the planning board minutes, November 30th, 2022 special meeting. Are there any additions, corrections, or deletions? And if there
Mr.
are,
Chairman?
yes, Mr. McDonald.
There's one correction. It's needed at the bottom of page 4. The next to the last line. That 2016 meeting, it has the vote as being 5-4. The vote was actually 5-3.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Modica? Got it, okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Costa?
do we vote on a draft?
Well, once we approve it, then it's
Or it goes
finalized,
quite a lot?
because Mr. Modica's got to make a revision, and that revision is noted.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
so do I have a motion? I have a motion by Ms. Fashich. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Costa. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Director's report, Mr. Stevens.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I just have one quick announcement, just for your information that Blackstone Valley Prep has appealed your decision of a week or two, but just before Christmas. No, they're alleging that there are errors in your decision, so they're going to be going to the zoning board on appeal. I just want to make you aware of that.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Item number 4. Public hearing, comprehensive permit, major land development preliminary plan. Project name, Steeple Stone, owner St. Patrick's Church Corporation, applicant One Neighborhood Builders, location 295 Broad Street, Assessors Plat 4, lot 266, and 305 Broad Street, Assessors Plat 4, lots 264. The zoning is a C1 zoning with public water and sewer. The applicant requests preliminary plan removal to approval to build 44 affordable housing units by adaptively reusing St. Patrick's Church, rebuilding the recovery and construction of new townhouses.
Thank you, Mr.
Mr.
Chair.
Modica.
Thank you. As noted, the project name is now called Steeple and Stone. Originally, it was known as St. Patrick Place. And as this board's also aware, this is a comprehensive permit application to adaptively reuse St. Patrick's Church. There'll be 21 residential units in the church, 14 in a rebuilt rectory, and 9 in 3 townhouses along Broad Street for a total of 44 units. All of these units will be deed restricted as affordable for a period of 99 years. At your last meeting, or your meeting last September, the board approved the master plan and granted several waivers related to residential density, lot coverage, and parking. And the master plan was approved with 2 conditions: that the townhouses be evenly staggered, which they've done, and that the traffic study be revised to reflect exit only from the property onto Church Street. The updated traffic study again shows that there will be no significant impact to Broad Street. And obviously, keep in mind, this is a dormant site. So anything that would go here is going to generate more than the 0 cars currently, especially since this property is zoned commercial. There are many more uses that could bring more intensive traffic. The project at preliminary plan before you is essentially the same as the approved master plan with just a few changes. The applicant has added a loading zone behind the rectory to improve internal vehicular circulation, so cars, vans, and delivery trucks can turn around and exit the property either at Broad Street or to continue out Church Street. A landscape plan has been submitted that shows significant vegetation and tree planting within the site that meets the town's land development and subdivision regulations. And also provided are detailed plans showing stormwater management that's been approved by Public Works. So the planning department continues to strongly support this project because it preserves a cultural and architectural landmark in St. Patrick Church and brings much needed affordable housing to this community. Planning department recommends approval of the comprehensive permit and the preliminary plan, provided that two conditions are met prior to recording final plan. That the applicant provide any required state or federal permits, such as a physical alteration permit from RIDOT, and that the two lots 264 and 266 are merged. Thank you.
Board, have any questions for Mr. Modica? Hearing none, is the applicant here?
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the planning board. My name is Ken McGonigal. I'm the attorney for One Neighborhood Builders, the developer. Glenn has taken a whole bunch of my thunder again. I should have remembered that he does that. So I can move right on to our team here tonight is smaller and quicker than we were on September 28th. But very excited to be here at this stage. First, I'm going to ask you to hear from Mike Abbott, who is our architect, and then Tim Bean, our engineer. Diane Sewell, who you didn't hear from last time, is our landscape architect, and she'll show you what she's created. Liz McChesney is our traffic engineer, who's here with us tonight for questions, but she has submitted her plan, so we won't be calling her up unless you or the public has questions for her. Milton Baxter, our Director of Real Estate and General Counsel for the developer, is here. And Jen Hawkins, our CEO, is here with us tonight. The biggest point that I wanted to make to you all was thank you for having this special meeting on January the 12th. Our application has to be in for Rhode Island Housing, the low-income housing tax credits. And the way it works is that all applications are scored from the different parts of the state. And if we have preliminary plan approval from the town of Cumberland, we will get more points in the scoring. And that meant that we all put the pedal to the metal from September 28th until tonight. And so did your employees here, really helpful to us with quick comments so that we could immediately change things. So we've thanked them. So we're thanking them in public, but I also really want to thank you all for being here tonight within the deadline. So first, I'd like you to hear from Mike Abbott, our architect, about what has changed since September 28th. Stand behind it.
Good evening. And again, thank you for hearing us on short notice like this, and we appreciate all that you do. I'm just going to be quick about our changes. And there's primarily architecturally, the one change that they've talked about is we staggered the townhouses along Broad Street. Previously, they kind of lined up straight, making more of a kind of a almost more uniform appearance. And so by staggering them, it makes it look a little more like the streetscape that was there and what is there today. So we made that change, and that's kind of an easy change for us. It didn't change the building types or how many units or anything like that. It was just really where they placed on the site. So we have done that. We have staggered the buildings, and now they kind of look more like three separate buildings instead of one large one and one smaller one. So we've done that. The other big change was we really looked at after all of the comments, and believe it or not, we actually do listen to comments that about our internal circulation and how are we going to handle when the van comes to pick up residents, drop off packages from FedEx. How are we going to handle this internal circulation? So we have reworked the buildings and took the rectory building and flipped its entrance. It still will have a front door facing Broad Street, but we've also then given the handicap ramp to the rear, so that we've created a new entrance on the rear of the rectory that has a handicap ramp that goes down and goes to the new loading area that we've made on the rear of the building that will accommodate our van traffic as well as the United States Post Office truck coming through, the FedEx trucks. It just gives us a little more area to kind of circulate internally. We can actually then pull into the van spot and turn around and come back out onto Broad Street so that we're not forced to exit out onto Church Street. So it really does improve our internal circulation. And by having the handicap ramp on the back, it's no different to us in terms of the internal use of the buildings. We're able to do that change and make that without really compromising anything inside the building. We still have our front door on the front of the building. We have a rear door. So it's kind of like everybody's house. We got a front door and back door. So depending on who's who and where you're going, we'll still have really good circulation throughout the site. We still like the front door facing Broad Street because we want people to know where the front door is. You should be able to see it and know where you're going. So we've kept that front door, but have accommodated the circulation in the rear. And then lastly, the big discussion was a lot of our parking and how is that going to work? And there were questions about how many units, how many bedrooms, how many of this. So I'm going to give you some numbers. So we have 44 units, but of that, that produces 66 bedrooms. And I can break them out. We have 28, 18, and 20. And they're all spread out differently through each of the buildings, but we have 66 total bedrooms. We have 69 parking spaces, but remember, as our testimony last time, we have those PACE units in the rectory, 10 units where people will not have a car. So our effective use is 56 parking spaces and we're providing 69. So we have 13 excess parking spaces for visitors, maybe an attending nurse that would be coming to visit some of the people or whatever. So we have excess parking, 13 spaces that will, I think, more than suffice, because even during the day, when a lot of people are off going to work, we'll still have even more spaces for those daily nurse visits and things like that. So we have 69 spaces. We are required to have 66, but effectively, because of our 10 PACE units where we have 10 units without any parking, that's only 56 spaces. So that gives us 13 extra spaces that we have on site every day to provide for visitor parking or workers or employees, anybody coming and going throughout the site. So I just wanted to clarify that. We didn't have those exact numbers for you last time. So hopefully that gives you a little more information as to what we have and what we've got. So that basically is my testimony, unless there's any questions.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Butler?
I just had a comment. One of my big concerns last time was the internal circulation. So I appreciate the fact that you guys went back. I think it's much better.
We listen.
It's much safer, I think,
Yeah.
for everybody. I
Yeah.
think it flows much
Yeah.
better. So I do appreciate that.
Yep.
And I appreciate breaking down the parking spaces too,
Yeah.
because it was confusing last time.
Yeah,
To add all the bedrooms together. So I think
Yeah.
that clarifies things for me at least. So thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Reese?
I have just a clarification. Can you explain to me 10 units without parking?
Those are what we call the PACE units.
Okay,
Those are the people that have a separate contract where those people are residents that are pre-nursing home, but they still need assistance, daily assistance. And so part of their rental agreement is that they don't have a car.
So the caregivers and the family members that will be with these residents, because like I think at the very first meeting, I made that point.
Well, that's why I
This-
wanted to
This is
clarify.
almost like an assisted living
No.
situation.
No,
Kind of it is
Uh,
because they require care.
they do require some visits.
And you're talking to a nurse, so be cautious there.
Okay,
So, and that's what I'm saying. They need,
but they don't need 24-hour care. You see what I mean? Yes, people will come and visit them during the day. And all medical services take place off-site. Like that's why we talked about the van last time, because
okay,
those PACE residents will go in the van to the main facility.
that would be a great picture
No,
if they
that
could, but
happens,
not
yeah.
all the time. But
Yeah,
thank you for your
I
explanation.
do have some clients in my agency that are members of PACE, and that is true. So I mean, PACE is basically a day program, so
Yeah.
it's not visiting nurses coming every day and helping people. There's some assistance, but it's mostly the PACE van
It's-
comes in,
it's-
picks people up, brings them to the center, brings them to their medical appointments, brings them to the meal sites, and then back at the end of the day. So
It's
it
really a
is
service.
much different than a nursing home or an assisted.
Yeah,
living.
it's really trying to keep people out of a nursing home. And, keep them in their own unit and have them have their own place before they need to go to a nursing home. So yes, there is daily checkup, visit, wellness checks, things like that, but not 100% full around the clock care kind of thing.
Mr. Costa, you have a question?
Yes, I have a question. You spoke earlier about a turnaround.
Mhm.
Can you kind of just show us where that is?
So what we've done is this is the road across the back. We've made a new area here to come off of that road so that you can totally pull out of the traffic stream. And yet, here's where the van parks. So you would pull in and then you can back up and come out.
So that shaded area there, so like the tripod.
That, we've also realigned a little bit in here. So yes, this is where the van would come, because our handicap ramp comes out from here.
Okay,
So the people would come and right on the van in there, or UPS would come in. We moved this and created a new rear door in the bridge area between the rectory and the sanctuary. So we have a new entrance right there, the handicap ramp comes down right to that parking area. So it's actually better than what we had before, because before we were kind of parking out here in the aisle, so to speak, and that would have impeded traffic. So now we have an area where it's totally out of the loop.
so how many, say, vans or automobiles would fit in that tripod,
Oh, I would say just one.
one at a time?
Yeah.
So what happens with the second and third van that come in? Are they gonna block the traffic flow?
You have an extra wide aisle here. So they would stack here, but no, that's not the UPS drivers and FedEx, pull over to the curb and run in and run out.
Yeah, that's an in and out type of thing, but you talk about van with handicap, all right. Thank you.
I have a question. First of all, I am a nurse's husband.
You're killing me tonight.
But the question is, are there gonna be parking assignments? And also those parking spaces that you say are not basically extra.
Yeah,
okay?
the 13, we can label them visitor.
That's what I was
Yeah.
getting to.
We'll
Yeah.
probably mix them all around
Okay,
and not put them all in one place. There'll probably be some in the front courtyard area,
Mm.
some at the back.
Okay.
Near the two primary
yeah,
entrances.
that makes sense. Yeah.
Mhm.
Anyone else have any questions? Thank you.
Don't go yet.
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Chair, I just have a quick housekeeping.
Sure.
thing with Mike that I'm hoping we can just run through. And I was hoping that the board would consider, continue to consider Mike as an expert in the area of architecture like you did on September 28th. Assuming that you would, I just had two quick questions for him, and I'll try to make them into one question to move them along faster.
He's appeared before us on
Many
other
times.
projects, so he's certainly an expert in our eye.
I'm old. I'm an expert.
Oh, let's not go down that.
So I'm gonna, on the fly, I'm gonna make this into
Sure.
one.
Mhm.
Mr. Abbott, have you reviewed the planning department staff report dated January 3rd, 2023?
Yes,
And I guess I'm gonna make it into two. In particular, did you review the findings of fact contained therein?
yes,
And in your field of expertise, do you agree with those findings?
absolutely. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
As far as the architectural aspect of the buildings themselves, is that you I have to address? I just had a question on
Sure.
on the townhouses.
Yep.
Okay, on the second floor of their bedrooms.
Yep.
Because I'm not a code guy. Okay, so I don't know what the code says. But as far as having, my understanding is all the first floor units have sliding glass doors to go out. Right, so that would be their second access of exit and egress. On the second floor, I'm not sure, and you probably can enlighten me, what are the requirements for, especially when there are bedrooms up there? And if something happened, if they got trapped up there.
Well, the bedroom windows count as egress
Okay,
if they're of a certain size.
Mhm.
So we have the double hungs.
okay,
The lower sash meets a code required width and height so that you can squeeze out through the lower window. It has to be only so many inches off the floor, has to be so wide, so high, so you can get out.
okay.
So those are the other means of egress for the second
Now,
floor.
would they use a ladder or
Oh, no, there,
just jump right out,
you jump.
Superman?
Into the swimming pool, yeah.
Okay.
No, it's meant for rescue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a code thing that I'm not aware of, and
Yeah,
it
it's,
just came to mind. When I
those
was-
are egress windows, they're
Okay.
called. Yep.
Thank you. Anyone else have any other?
Same thing like on the rectory, you'll notice we've added window wells
Yes,
to the lower level because we had to put in larger windows instead of the little foundation windows, which you can't get out of.
Mhm.
So we had to put in bigger windows that you can climb out of to get out of a lower floor as well as an upper floor.
thank you.
But don't try it.
On our next presentation is from our engineer, Mr. Bean, who also was, we discussed his qualifications in September.
Yes,
I would hope that the planning
oh,
board
certainly.
consider
Absolutely.
Mr. Bean as well. Mr. Bean, would you begin by summarizing the improvements to the plan that you have created?
Good evening. Once again, for the record, Timothy Behan, professional engineer. Good evening. For the record, my name is Timothy Behan, professional engineer with the firm Commonwealth Engineers in Providence, Rhode Island. I'd like to walk through the plan set just to highlight some of the engineering final design, we'll call it. It's even though it's preliminary at this stage, engineering wise, we consider it final unless there's additional comments. All right, thank you. Just a quick overview for the people who may not be familiar with the project. It's highlighted in blue here. It's at the corner of Broad Street and Church Street, and facing north is that direction. Just to remind everybody of the existing conditions out there, subject property is in the blue. We have the Broad Street here, Church Street over here. The existing church building is this orange building. The existing rectory building is situated here. We have an existing shed, an existing garage. We have a large parking area to the south side of the property and 3 existing curb cuts on Broad Street. This shows a quick summary of what the master plan looked like. We mentioned before, we made a change at this location. You can see the two buildings here were on the same alignment, and we've modified that. And back here, we made a change too for that loading area. Other than that, there's been very minor detail changes. The proposed plan, you can see how we changed that. So now they're staggered evenly, the three row house structures there. And we've already spoken about this, but we've relocated and added a loading zone here. And the Pace parking van is situated at that location. We're looking now at the proposed utility plan, and this shows several things. One is stormwater. For the stormwater controls out there, we've met the town regulations, the state regulations, DEM. We're also abutting a state road, DOT, so we met those regulations. And to meet those regulations, we need to put in 4 separate subsurface infiltration areas. So we have one here, one here, one here, and one here. They're beneath the parking area and their chambers. So when it's all done, you won't see them unless you really know what you're looking for. And you'll see some drainage structures to grade showing the manhole openings. We coordinated the sewer design with the sewer department. There's currently no sewer service situated in front of the property. They kind of had it going through the abutting property and tying into a manhole. So we're going to extend the existing sewer line up Broad Street, standard up the center line, and then we're going to bring in an 8-inch service main leading into the property, and all the services will tie into that 8-inch main. We've also coordinated with the Pawtucket Water Supply Board for the water service and also the fire service line. So there's 2 separate lines, and that's what this blue area is up here. We're going to tap into a water line there and bring them into the existing church building there. And afterwards, the water will be fed through underground from this building, feeding these 3 buildings. So it's been coordinated with Pawtucket Water Supply Board, and they're on board. We've also set the plans to the fire department, and they've signed off on the project. As you recall, during master plan stage, they're the ones who originally wanted the access to Church Street. And sheet 13 of 22 is the soil erosion control plan during construction. And this plan has been designed in accordance with the town DEM standards and DOT standards for soil erosion control measures. We have the standard entrance, the crushed stone entrance, to keep the sediments on site so it doesn't track out of the site as much. We have perimeter silt fence to keep the sediments on site, and miscellaneous notes and details, like all the catch basins on there will be protected with, we call them little silt sacks. So the sediment can be trapped before it gets into the pipes and things like that. And for permits, we have Department of Transportation physical alteration permit for the curb cut changes. We have permits for DEM for stormwater and soil erosion control permits. And I believe that's it. Everything else is local. Like I mentioned, we had the water and sewer sign offs and the fire sign offs.
Board have any questions for the engineer? Mr. D'Ambrosio.
So one of the concerns I'm sure that some folks around here are going to have is seeing that sewer line extended down Broad Street. As you may have noticed driving in, it's currently under construction. It's going to be repaved. So is there any coordination going on with the state as far as installing that pipeline before the road is going to get paved?
It's the sewer pipe will not be installed before it gets paved. However, DOT has a pavement moratorium, they call, on this road for 5 years. So if somebody does want to cut into it, you can, like, we can install that. but they make us pave the full width of the road again. So it's much more costly to do it in the 5-year period. Sure.
Right,
We
so we won't
understand,
see
we
patches
understand that
everywhere.
requirement.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. D'Ambrosio, because that was my question. Anyone else? Thank you.
Stay with me. I just wanted to ask Mr. Bean, in his professional opinion, if he had read the Town of Cumberland Planning Department's recommendation on this application.
Yes, I have.
And,
We have it here with me.
and within your field of expertise, do you agree with those findings of fact?
Absolutely, I do. I do fully agree.
Thank you. If you're all set with Mr. Bean, we'll move on to our last scheduled presentation.
All set?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, thank you. Okay, sure.
Diane Sewell is our landscape architect. And is your plan up there yet, or do you want to? While she sets up, she wasn't here in September, which is why I'm passing the resumes along, and I wondered if the board might be willing to consider Diane as an expert witness in the field of landscape architecture based on her resume, or I could ask some questions and get some answers if you'd like that.
Anyone have a motion to accept? Ms. Sewell,
I'll make a motion to accept her as an expert witness.
all in favor?
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Diane, you've been acknowledged as an expert, so would you please run through your layout with the board?
Good evening. My name's Diane Soul. I'm a registered landscape architect in Rhode Island. I've been practicing since 1976 and been doing consulting work since 1986.
Although I've never met you, your name is very well known throughout the state. So when somebody says Diane Sewell, I know exactly who they're talking about. I just never met you in person.
Nice to meet you. I'll just give an overview of the landscape and how I'll proceed with that is we'll start along Broad Street and work south and around and end up on Church Street. Along Broad Street, we have introduced a wrought iron or aluminum or steel picket fence, similar to the character of the existing iron fence that's along Church Street. It's a very old historic fence, and we're just complementing it. We couldn't really reproduce it in any kind of economical manner. So in front of the townhouses, we're proposing a 3-foot high picket fence. And then with low evergreen shrubs behind the fence that will buffer, won't shield the townhouses, but it will provide a green low buffer along that facade. And then moving to the south property line, this is the one area that we didn't meet the town requirement for a 10-foot side yard setback. This area, we have a 2-foot wide because of the parking requirements. And we're slightly, hold on, I can give you the exact. Along the south property line, we're required to have 5 trees and 11 shrubs. We have 3 trees and 7 shrubs just because it's so tight there. And we have utilities and that sort of thing. So that's what's happening on that side. Along, we are proposing a chain link fence, black vinyl coated chain link fence all along the south property line. And it does curve around and run up the east property line as well, black coated chain link fence. Along the east property line, we have, as I mentioned, a black vinyl coated chain link fence and buffering along that line as well. And we do meet all the requirements for the town. And then along the north property line, along Church Street, we're of course keeping the iron fence there and the wall. And we do meet the requirements for landscape there. And we're buffering the transformer that sits at the driveway cut on the northeast side. Interior to the property, we are showing what I'll call a snug, as I watch this silly program called Escape to the Country. That's our snug right there. And that's, we're proposing there a small water feature, which there's some photographs at the bottom, I believe, of that graphic there. Let's see. Yeah, they're down here. We're proposing a low water fountain with some granite seating and permeable pavers in that area there. And of course, landscaping, buffering.
Pardon me. Can you get the bottom of that slide, please? Thank you.
Yeah.
Just a little bit more. Perfect.
And if you could move it maybe to the left a bit. Or the other direction.
Your other left.
Yeah, that's great. On the far right-hand photo, that's a water feature. Next to that actually is the fence, the wrought iron fence or the steel or picket aluminum fence I mentioned that goes along Broad Street. That's the character of it. As I mentioned, it would be about 3 feet tall. The next photo in the middle is our granite cube seating blocks that would be within the snug situated around the fountain. The next photo to the left are permeable pavers, which we're proposing for all the patio areas as well as the snug area. And then the far left photograph represents the privacy dividers between the back patios on the townhouse units. So each unit would have a 5 or 6 foot tall privacy screen to give them a little more comfort in their own unit, I guess you could put it that way. We have the underground infiltration stormwater systems, which prohibited us from putting trees in all the islands. We maintained a 10-foot perimeter buffer or setback from those infiltration systems. So we weren't able to put trees in all the islands as we would had hoped to be able to do. Let's see, and I think I've pretty much covered everything. We meet the requirements, as I mentioned, for the town's landscape ordinance, with the exception of the 2 that I mentioned on the south side of the property line. If anyone has questions, I'll be
Board have
happy
any
to
questions?
answer them.
I have a few,
Yes,
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Costa.
Diane, could you show us on that map where the vinyl fence is going to be?
Sure.
Right along here.
Okay. All right, there, the townhouse units here have these back permeable pavers. That's the square designation.
Okay.
And in between each one are the privacy fences.
All right, how about the granite cubes?
The granite cubes, this is the snug area here. And along the perimeter, I would say that, just not counting them, probably 8 or 10 of these granite cubes that you can see the photograph down at the bottom. So it's a rustic sort of meditative space that we're trying to create.
About the weather fountain.
Was in the middle of it.
Where?
Here. The snug, in the snug, correct?
In the snug, yeah.
In the snug.
Is that little circle?
Thank you, thank you.
Any other questions?
Chairman,
Mr. Bush?
can you tell me, what is the distance from the front of the units to the street? You know, how much room you have there to work with?
Not off the top of my head. I don't know the scale, but if I had to guess, between the front of the unit, the townhouse units
Yeah.
to the back of sidewalk,
Or to the, to the front street, to Broad Street. How much the setback is, you know? Oh, fine.
Sure, absolutely.
It's just under 15 feet. It was flying.
Oh,
It's just under 15 feet at that narrowest point, and it
Mhm.
gets wider as it goes further down the street.
okay. Were you able to put any street trees there, or did you just say that you could only fit a shrubbery in the front?
we do have street trees 50 feet on center
Okay.
along Broad Street.
All right, I just didn't know if this was accurate, the rendering we had. I didn't.
That might have
Or-
been developed at a time before the landscape
Right,
plan was produced.
okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. DeBrosa?
It's a little hard to see on the plans. The permeable paving, are those under drained and connected to the infiltration system or the drainage system?
Tim, can you follow up with that question?
For the record, Tim Behan, the pervious pavements are not qualified BMPs as part of the stormwater system itself. That's just being a good neighbor type situation, so they're not collected.
Okay, so are any worries about the gravel reservoir that they're typically set atop overflowing or anything like that?
No, we did some testing out there. We did, I believe, 17 test holes. It's a very good material out there, very coarse. It's a good, what we call like a septic gravelly material, well draining. So we don't envision any drainage issues out there.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
As I mentioned, our traffic engineer, Liz McChesney, is here. The management of one is here. But that concludes our plan presentation.
Okay.
For a preliminary plan.
If the traffic engineer is here, could he give us just an overview because I'm sorry, not he. Just an overview because of the modifications or changes you did.
Sure. Sure. So since, as a condition of approval, the things that we changed were, we now have an unrestricted full access entrance at Broad Street. Previously, we've done several iterations. I think the last iteration, we were showing no left turn. So right now there's unrestricted access on Broad Street, entrance in and out, and 12-foot wide right out exit only driveway on Church Street. So we ran the analysis with that. But I can kind of go through it if you want, or just kind of summarize what.
Yeah, just an overview.
Sure, sure. I mean, just so for a summary, we really didn't change, the level of service didn't change. So previously I had talked about the fact that comparison between the no build, which is future conditions before this project is built, and then build, which is when this project is built. There's no change in level of service between the two. And again, we still have good levels of service for build at Site Drive 1 for the AM peak. We've got a level of service C, which is good. Site Drive 2, which is Church Street, we have a level of service B. And then for PM Peak, Site Drive 1, Broad Street, level of service C, and Church Street, Site Drive 2, level of service A. So again, we have the same conclusion that this project will not have a detrimental impact on adjacent roadway.
Board have any questions? Thank you very much.
Sure.
So we're all set to go. Okay. So at this point, we'll move on to the public hearing portion. So if there's anyone in the audience that has any questions or concerns, please come to the podium, give us your name and address for the record.
Barbara Paquette, 6 Elizabeth Street. Good evening, and thank you very much for once again hearing my concerns. It's the beat the same drum. But thank you also to One Neighborhood Builders and their associates for the work and dedication on this project. Please know that my concerns, comments, and criticisms are no indictment of the project itself. Rather, my objections are a means to hopefully safeguard our neighborhood. As I've stated before, I've lived in Valley Falls my entire life. I've lived at my present address for 40 years. I've been a landlord for all that time. My husband and I, and many of our neighbors, maintain our property and sidewalks and are vigilant in watching out for one another and our properties. That's what neighborhoods do. Our street, Elizabeth, like Geldod, has homes that are mostly on-street parking. For the past 40 years, we as a neighborhood have had an honor and respect system for parking. This system is simply tenants are very honest and honorable and respectful of each other's parking spots. Typically, it is you park within the parameters of your property line, and it's worked. Have there been some problems? Of course there have. But they've been settled for the most part very amicably. As this board knows, the recent increase in school traffic and construction traffic and just a general increase in the number of cars that are on the road has led to some parking nightmares on the streets. The proposed plan, now I don't know, my research when I actually did it from the site on the planning board, my numbers are slightly different than the ones that I've heard tonight. I didn't realize that there were changes, but there were some minor changes. I would like to say that I've listened to people be entered as experts. And they are experts in everything that they do, and they do a very good job. But as I've said before, the real experts in this room right now are the people who live in this area. We're the ones that live here day to day. We're the ones that drive here. We're the ones that live here, walk the streets. We are the experts. And so I ask that you take that into consideration. This is just not some fly-by-night, person standing up here who has a beef. This is someone who has been very loyal to the town of Cumberland. And I know we want affordable housing. I know we do. And that should be really important to everyone. But you know what else should be important to everyone? Each of the neighbors, each of the people who have lived in this area. We should be given as much consideration as those people who are going to move into those beautiful new apartments. I understand about affordable housing, but I also understand about neighborhood safety and neighborhood camaraderie. By my estimation, there should be 92 spaces. That's 23 spaces short. We only have 69. And these were the numbers I did based on the numbers that I had seen in the plan. I'm aware that industry standards say that 1.5 spaces are adequate. I don't know about you, but I've never seen a half a car. Never seen a half a car. I've been a landlord for 40 years. I have rented a lot of my house, my apartments. I have never, once I rented to a single man. Any couple that I rented to has two cars. So I'm not sure where this is coming from, that they only need one, that they're only gonna have one car. Now I know I'm giving you the scenario, that's the worst case. But what I've sat here and listened to tonight is the best case. So I say that there needs to be some middle ground. We need to reach the middle ground. Even the best case scenario is short 7 parking spots. I know we talked about visitor parking, but I didn't see that when I did my research. What about the spots that are taken up when there's a heavy snowstorm and plowing has to take place? What about visitor parking? Where are they going to park? I'll tell you where, on Geldard and Elizabeth. That's where they'll park. And that will lead to parking wars. I spoke to people in Revere, in Peabody, in Boston, and in East Greenwich. And all of them have spoken to me about the wars for the parking that's going on down there. Because there's been such growth in residential buildup that they don't have the parking available. It appears that this is a project near and dear to many people, mostly the people who are going to benefit from it, as it should. The builders, the town, the increased mandated affordable units, seems like that's the driving force, and the tenants who will move into these beautiful new apartments. To the residents who have been really good neighbors and taxpayers, not so much. I do not feel that we have been heard at all. So I stand before you once again to plead that you administer the same high regard for the needs of the existing residents as you will for this new project. Please give careful consideration. And I don't know whether it's in the purview of your power or authority, but here are some of the things that might alleviate some of the angst. Make Geldard and Elizabeth resident parking only, or have the plan increase the number of available parking spots. There's an old word, it's called a blivet. And a blivet is something where you put 15 pounds of material in a 5-pound bag. That seems like that's exactly what we're doing here. We're pushing this, we're filling the space, fill the space. And so the fallout from not addressing these issues, if not circumvented, will do much more harm than the intended good. Thank you for your time and patience.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to comment? Anyone? Okay, I'll close this portion of the.
Mr.
public
Chair,
hearing. Yes, oh, I'm sorry. Is there anybody in the queue?
we do have one person with their hand raised. I also want to mention that we received the email earlier today from Brian Boulay of Thompson Hill Drive, who was in support of this project, which we sent around to the planning board earlier today. And right now I'm going to promote Mrs. Costa to a panelist. Okay, Mrs. Costa, you're on. Just unmute yourself. There's a microphone in the lower left-hand part of the screen you need to click. So there's a little microphone icon you should be able to see, lower left part of the screen that has a red line through it. You just need to click it to get rid of that red line. No. No, I'm just trying to chat with her. Maybe she could respond that way. So Mrs. Costa, I sent a couple chat messages to you that should pop up on the right part of your screen if you want to leave a public comment. Is there a clicky thing for? Yes, you'd have to click on the right part of your screen to bring up the webinar chat. Here. But I have to ask her to, I can't do it on my own.
No, I know.
Oh, so Mrs. Costa, in the upper part of your screen, there's three dots, three horizontal dots. If you click on those dots, you can also unmute yourself. I see your message that you said hello. Do you want to type a message, or if you want to speak, you would need to unmute yourself by clicking the microphone icon? So if you're having technical difficulties, feel free to just type a message and I can read it into the record. Says the microphone button won't work. Do you see in the upper right part of your screen, there's like in a little blue box, there are three horizontal dots. Okay, you gotta hover over that blue box with the dots, and that could also unmute you. My question, this is from Mrs. Costa. My question is, how many units will be built there and how many parking spaces total? I think I can answer that. There's gonna be 44 units and what do we say, 69? 69 parking spaces. Do you have any other questions, Mrs. Costa, or comments? Where will they park when it snows? I'll leave that to you guys.
We have designated snow pile areas that are separate from where they park. So we'll plow and put the snow in those areas. So people will still park where they're going to park, where they're supposed to park.
Mrs. Costa says the lot will need to be empty to be plowed.
It'll be like an ongoing thing. They'll plow part, people will juggle cars around. You know, in a snowstorm, people juggle. So they'll be juggling to get people to move cars and plow this area, then move cars and plow this area. But we do have designated snow dumping areas.
Mrs. Costa, do you have anything to add? Mrs. Costa says, I have a feeling that it won't be as easy as that.
It'll be a mess.
Mrs. Costa, do you have anything else? I'm just gonna give her a sec because maybe she's typing in something. But Mrs. Costa, let me know yes or no if you have another comment or question. Will the plan be available for viewing? The plan is available. They've shown some of the plans tonight by video. I don't know if your video was turned on. I can also direct you to the plan if you want to email me. And I give you my email address. It's gmodica, MODICA @cumberlandri.org, and I can provide you a copy of the plans. And do you have any other comments or questions? Mrs. Costa asks, what about the historical designation of the church? The church is not a local landmark and it's not listed on the National Register of Historic Places. So it's not formally recognized as a historic property. So let me know if you have any other questions. Mrs. Costa said, that's all for now. Thanks.
You're welcome.
And
Mr. Motor, is there anyone else in the queue?
yeah, so if there's anyone else on Zoom who would like to speak, there is a raise your hand icon at the bottom of your screen. So you click that, you can raise your hand. So we have no one else in the queue with a hand raised, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. At this point, then, I will close the public hearing at, we'll say 7:37 and restrict comments to the board. Mr. Butler, you have a question?
Just a comment. I wanted to thank Mrs. Paquette and Mrs. Costa. You know, you are experts because you live in this neighborhood. And certainly for me, I'm sure I can speak for my colleagues. I mean, we do take your feedback very seriously. And I agree that parking is a huge issue. Before I lived in Cumberland, I lived in a 3-family in Pawtucket with on-street parking. I went through parking wars and who's going to park where in the driveway and fights with the landlords, who's going to go to work first when it snows. And I get it. And they're very legitimate concerns. I guess for me, what it always comes down to is what happens if not this? You know, I guess the ideal is it remains a church and it only gets used a few hours a week on Sundays, but the diocese has made pretty clear they can't make that business plan work and they're selling the property, whether it's to one builders or to somebody else. And I'm not a commercial developer, but I know just from being on this board for a long time that when you have a commercial piece of property at a signalized intersection, that's incredibly desirable. And to me, I would look at that property and say, you know, that would be a great place for a Dunkin' Donuts. It would be a great place for a Seasons Market. It would be a great place for a strip mall that would produce traffic constantly. You know, the Dunkin' Donuts in this town have 24-hour licenses, 24 hours of traffic coming in and out of drive-throughs on Broad Street, on Church Street. And, you know, so is this better than that? To me personally, it is. And I have to trust that, One Builders has done this work for a long time. They understand their tenants and the parking and, sometimes as a planning board, we just have to have faith. Things don't always work out the way we hope they're going to work out. That's for sure. And we see it in this area of town, most recently, but I do continue to think this is a good plan, but I think your concerns are incredibly legitimate. I think not only have we heard them, I think One Builders has heard them, and I think that they will work with their future tenants to, to protect the neighborhood and to be good neighbors. At least that's my hope. So, but I do want you to know that I at least heard what you had to say, and I do think it's legitimate.
Anyone else? I'd like to hear from the applicant, if they have a response to the questions that were raised this evening by the people in the audience.
Mr. Chair, I actually kind of thought that Mr. Abbott did, but if you'd like to just direct it, then I'll be happy to get any team member in.
Okay.
One other thing that I wanted to follow from Chris, I forgot your last name. Mr. Butler's point in our behalf, although this didn't come directly, but it does dovetail what you said. One Builders is going to continue to own this property. It's not a developer to build it and run. We're in the affordable housing business. We have to run it, and we have to be good neighbors. So, what particularly would you like to have us address?
Well, I think we can just address the snow removal question, and of course,
well, that may have come from Ms. Paquette in September, and we frankly did not have the snow storage places on the plan back then, but we heard her and you, and that's why they're there. And so what Mike has told us in meetings that unless it's a once in a century snowstorm, we're not going to lose any parking spaces to snow because we have places to put this. And that directly came from September 28th, because we have to admit we didn't have it on the plan, among other improvements.
well, we can thank our lucky stars that we do not live in Buffalo. Okay. But having gone through the blizzard of 78, I'm at least that old, and I worked in the Providence at the time, and fortunately, being a public servant, I worked for the state. They got us out of Dodge before the real nightmares hit. But it was a struggle getting home, and we were locked in our homes for over a week, and I live on a main drag, and that's the one that gets plowed all the time, and it took forever. I mean, I can remember people with their sleds coming out and pulling their sleds up to go to the IGA, what was the IGA at the time. Okay, so there's no way we can plan for anything that, catastrophic. And I think the best effort is to make sure that you have a plan in place that will accommodate, our normal winters that we have here of, 30 inches of snow tops? Excuse me? Last year, okay, that's total. And you get a storm that's 18 inches or so, it's a little bit, of a struggle. But if you got a plan to put the snow, okay, then you have to live with whatever happens in a real difficult storm. Was there anything
But
else?
again, we really don't think we're going to lose any spaces. It will be a little difficult,
Yeah.
as Mr. Abbott said, moving people around,
Hmm.
but it'll get accomplished.
Okay, and then there was discussion about the concern of not having enough parking spaces. And yet, what you have said in your testimony, or your experts have said in testimony, is that you reserved a certain number of spaces that are, we'll call them free spaces, because you're limiting certain units to 0 cars. Am I
That's correct.
correct? Okay.
Pace units.
So that gives us, I believe it was 18, 13, okay, free spaces. So I'm just wondering what,
Well, you know, the other issue is, or the other, we gave evidence in September that, that other properties that are owned by this developer, the spaces don't get used. Like, we honestly believe that we have plenty. And then, I don't want to speak for him because I don't remember exactly how he presented it to the board, but you know, your own planner did some ad hoc, investigation of places in the area.
Right.
And his numbers kind of bore out what our experts said. We're not going to use all these spaces.
but I can address a half a space, okay? Very simple. And it's kind of strange the way to think about it, but you could have a unit that has no spaces and the other unit has 2 cars. And if you expand that and you get to the point, that's where you come up with that half a space when you start dividing up. Yeah, make it easy, yeah.
So am I to understand that your estimation is that for every 1 bedroom, there will only be 1 car? Because I've been doing my figures and that's pretty much what I've come up with. Hi.
You're my buddy. She won't let me get out of here. Generally, we use the rule of thumb of the 1 bedroom as a measuring stick. For example, we have several 3-bedroom units. There's not 3 cars in those.
But there could be.
No, they're children. They're not going to drive.
They're 16. You're going on the assumption that they're only going to be 10 and 2. But I'm going on the assumption that they're going to be 15 and 17. Well,
No,
Am
I hear you. Yes, some unit might have a teenager with a car, but typically we feel that like the 3-bedroom maybe would only have 1.5 to 2
And I
people
would
per.
love to be able to be in line with your feelings, but I'm going to say that I have the
I
expert.
know you've been a landlord.
I have been, and I know I've never rented to a couple that only has 1 car. So that's my concern.
Well, as our numbers and other units, other properties, like a 1-bedroom and a 2-bedroom does equal out to be like 1.5 spaces.
So can I be assured that then you will only rent to people with 1 car in that 1-bedroom unit? No.
That I don't know.
Okay, so, but can you understand where, I'm just saying that those people that are gonna have more than 1 car and not enough spaces are gonna be parked in front of my house. And now it's gonna call.
No, we're directing them all up to the CVS.
Okay,
We're gonna go to the CVS.
Tony's got a lot of space.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Okay.
I understand what you're saying.
Sir, I'm not, it's not a concern about the validity or the quality of your project, it's that
No,
it's selfish. I want to protect
well,
and my peace in living in my neighborhood. And I think that every person on this board and on the committee should have that in their best interest as well. Again, I'm not asking for anything other than that you give us the same consideration that that they've given you. And I don't think I think it's equitable. And that's all I'm asking for is equity, not fairness, but equity.
Well, what my aim is because of the concerns that you have, I wanted the experts. Now, when I consider experts, okay, they're licensed engineers or licensed architects. That's where the expert comes from.
They don't. And I will.
Oh, I know that.
To the name. It's poetic about what a school should look like. You do that all day long. I'm an educator. But in the reality is, that I go to a school and it doesn't fit my expectations. And that's what my expert has said. It's not gonna be a viable school. And I think that's what I'm trying to say. I just want some consideration for the streets where there's off-street parking, excuse me, on-street parking. That when this blows up, and I have a funny feeling it may, that now we're gonna be calling the police, we're gonna be fighting, there are gonna be cones out on the parking split spaces. That's no way to live. And I don't think we should. And I think it can all be solved if we put our heads together and came up with a solution.
I'm not disagreeing with you, because when I
I
lived,
got a little hot, sorry.
I can tell you, I lived in a city south of Cumberland.
Mhm.
Okay, my wife, when I first got married, we lived in a 3-family residence, 6 cars, 2 cars each.
Mine right now.
Okay, fortunately for them, our landlord had a driveway that fit 6 cars,
Oh, God. you
back to
know
back to
best.
back to back.
Mhm.
Okay, so I can appreciate and I understand where you're coming from. Yes, that's true. You can have a situation where there's 2 cars for every single unit.
Mhm.
So
I never had
I'm,
it
not-
not be.
so I just want to let you know, I'm not disagreeing with you at all.
Just never had it not be, so that's.
Hmm.
Of
Are you concerned that these people are gonna park on your street?
course they.
Is that what it is?
Do you know how many BBP people parked on the street? It was an ongoing issue, but we ended up settling it amicably. My fear is that I'm not so sure that this will happen in this situation. Because they're gonna have visitors, they're gonna be, people are gonna be coming and going, and there's no spot where they're gonna go. Just. Those are the things that happen. So. Those are the things that I'm pleading with you to consider. Because I really think it's a value. And I know that you say, oh, they could use, it could be worse, but it could be better too. I don't go, I'm a poker. It could be much better. And I think we need to work towards that. Not just accept that this is what every person in this neighborhood has to accept. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Don't come back.
No, my point is I wanted to have the applicant address some of her concerns, okay, relative to snow removal and parking off street and side streets. And I can admit to you that, at some point in time, I can tell you, talking about the blizzard of 78, if I didn't have a house that had a pretty good long driveway, I would have parked my cars down to what is now Dave's Marketplace. And I would have left them there and walked home until storm went and so on. So I can appreciate the point that there is a likelihood at some point in time that someone say, well, gee, I can't get in there because they're removing snow. So let's hope they park over at CVS and not down on the side street.
Well, there are also tools available to management to help that, and I see that management has come to the podium. So
My name is Milton Baxter. I'm the Director of Real Estate and General Counsel for One Neighborhood Builders. I spoke before at our previous hearings, and I've seen a lot of the same faces here, and I appreciate all the participation from the public and the thoughtful questions from the board. And I particularly appreciate the assistance that we've been rendered with the whole process from the planning staff and how attentive they've been. So I wanted to echo what Mr. McGonigal had said earlier in our presentation. In terms of parking, so once the property is in operation, it becomes our responsibilities as managers to manage the parking, right? And so our property manager has 11,000 units under management, mostly in the Boston area. It's Peabody Properties. They are experts at how to remove snow from a lot when there's cars on it. There's snow removal operations that occur during the storm and then after the storm. So typically during the storm, it's making sure it's passable. And then after the storm, it's cleaning it up. We've made space available for snow stockpiling so that spaces aren't eliminated with that process. Sometimes you'll see that. You'll see a big snow stockpile someplace and 2 or 3 spaces are gone. We have snow stockpile areas to prevent that. So it will be the responsibility of our property management company to interface with the vendor who does the snow removal to handle that process. Similarly, with the other overall arching parking issues, same thing. It's the responsibility of our management company to manage the parking. So just by way of example, as of October of 2021, 82% of our residents in our current development were single adult households. That's primarily because of the income restrictions, right? So if you have a 2-adult household, typically those incomes that they make will exceed what they're able to, the restrictions that we have. So that's the nature of why so many of our households that we currently have a single adult. Additionally, we can, if we are experiencing issues with parking, we can, within our lease, place requirements that there can only be a certain number of vehicles based on the size of the household. And that can be managed and balanced based on the census of the tenants that are currently there. So if we have, as we mentioned, there'll be 10 units that will have no parking at all because of the paced units. The property management company can manage through permitting, stickers, monitoring how many vehicles are allowed in the lot from tenants at any given time. And that can be balanced based on who is currently living there. So those are all management tools. And I think that when you have a professional management company and a developer who's going to own the property and keep it for long term, we have a vested interest in making sure that we work well with our neighbors and that this is a positive experience for the town of Cumberland, and that, you know, it enhances the town. It doesn't cause a problem. So we will be making sure our responsibility is to manage the manager. So we will be overseeing them. And to the extent that there's any enforcement that's required, the city, we will work with the city, we'll work with the management company, and we'll manage our parking on site. So I hope that answers it. There might not be a perfect answer to some of the questions that have been raised here, but it's our experience that the parking we've provided on site is such that it's going to accommodate the tenant's use there, and that if there is issues with parking, it'll be managed through our management company, and that includes snow removal and such. So.
Thank you. Mr. Bush.
Yes. Do you assign spaces to each tenant, and are there a certain number of spaces assigned to if you have a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom?
So we can do that. We currently do not in our current developments, but that is certainly a management tool that can be done. So things are like assigned parking, and then also permitted guest parking, rules and regulations about how many vehicles, how many guest vehicles can be on site. Those are all things that can be handled within the lease and within our house rules and regulations that are part of the leasing agreement.
But initially, when you bring new tenants in, that isn't addressed up front, so you don't know how many cars they have, or
No, it will be when we're signing new leases, we'll understand how many adults are in the household, an idea of the ages of the other occupants of the so if they're children, ages of the children. And that's the balancing that I mentioned that the management company can do. If we know that there's a particular 2-bedroom house that has an adolescent who is driving and has a car, and there's another tenant who doesn't, as I mentioned, there might, with 82% of our folks currently don't are single head of household, single adult heads of household. So by managing that process, they can say, okay, we have a space, we can accommodate that. And so they can assign a space for that. So I don't want to commit to saying we're going to give assigned parking spaces. I want the managers to be able to manage it in the best way possible. That might be assigned parking spaces. It might be permits, stickers. There might be a whole host of things that they can do, but it'll be their job with our oversight to manage it.
and based on your experience, do you have an idea approximately how many parking spaces per bedroom you need in your other units? Do you?
Again,
I've
it's
not broken it down that way.
It varies because of the sizes of the different developments, but
Yeah.
I think, we have 66 bedrooms 10 of which are going to be no parking. So there's 56 bedrooms. So potentially 56 vehicles, right? So if everyone who had a bedroom had a vehicle, and we have 69 spaces. So
I
that,
see. Yeah.
and that gives 13 spaces for visitor and for attendant care and that type of thing. So I think that, and I think our experience is that it's going to be less than that. There's not going to be one car for every bedroom. Yeah, Mr. McGonigal reminded me that while we have 10 PACE units, we have 12 units that are going to be age restricted. So there'll be two additional units that will be age restricted. And it's our experience that oftentimes there's only one vehicle in the age restricted units. So that's another 2 units where we think that the parking demand will be 1 space per unit.
Can you explain the age restricted?
So there will be a deed restriction saying that 12 of the units must be rented to people who are 62 years old or older. Now, note that I didn't say,
Old people.
no, I was very careful when I said age restricted.
I do have a question, though.
Sure.
Explain to me this situation. You have single units, so single adult buy the unit. Now they have a significant other or a boyfriend, girlfriend that moved right in. How do you handle that?
Again, so first off, if the person isn't on the lease, then they're not allowed to be living there. So
Oh,
it would be up to the management company to police that. If there were a tenant who wanted to add someone to the lease, that's where the balancing would come into effect. When we're fully leased up, we're 100% occupied, we'll know how many cars we currently have on site. And if we have the ability to permit an extra car for a unit, then we can do that because we know how many vehicles are on site. So it'll be a management exercise to control at any given time the number of cars that are allowed to park on site.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. Point of order.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald.
We can't have this extraneous speaking from the chamber.
Okay, thank you. Board have any other questions, comments? Thank you. Well, we've heard testimony from the applicant, staff comments, and of course, concerns and comments from the people in at the public hearing. So what's the pleasure of the board?
I'll make a motion unless anyone has any other comments. In regards to 295 Broad Street, I'll make a motion that the comprehensive permit and the preliminary plan be approved, provided the following conditions are met prior to recording final plan. Number 1, the applicant provides all applicable state and or federal permits. And number 2, the applicant merges assessors plat 4 lot 264 and assessors plat 4 lot 266 via administrative subdivision. And in making this decision, refer to the findings of fact that are located in Mr. Modica's memo to the planning board dated January 3rd, 2023.
I have a motion by Mr. Butler. Do I have a second? Second by Mr. D'Ambrosio. Any other discussion? Mr. Bush.
I just wanted to say to the neighbor who came up and spoke so eloquently about this, that we do care about the neighborhood and about you. and in some cases, there are cases where I've voted against things like this. In this case, I think with this developer, it's not a developer who is going to build something, make a profit and run. They're there for the long haul. They don't want to have the aggravation of dealing with, well, you. But not specifically, but you know what I mean, because I wouldn't want to. Yeah, okay. And they have a track record of doing this. They're nonprofit. And I think they have their hearts in the right place and they're, I don't think they'd be doing this. I trust that they've done this so many other times in other places and they know typically how it works out with parking, that I'm willing to trust them on this and go along with them. But I do understand what you're talking about.
Thank you, Mr. Bush. Any other discussion? And I will echo Mr. Bush's comments. Mr. McDonald.
Just, I don't want to open up a can of worms, but the parking is it's a legitimate concern. The idea of residential parking, just for information, not to open up a can of worms, but just for everybody's information, there's a process to do that in a town. I'm assuming it has to come from the town council, is that correct? To declare a street to have residential parking.
Yes,
Okay,
that would go through the town council. And we don't have any, by the way, in the town.
I didn't think we did. The other question is there any, I know they do in Boston. Are there any lurking legal issues if the town were to do that? In other words, a taxpayer paying taxes saying you're not allowing me to park on this street because I live in the next street over and. Okay,
I don't think so. Like you said, it happens all over,
yep,
mainly cities. I don't see any problem with it, but the town council has, I think it's actually the police department that doesn't support that.
okay.
But I mean, obviously it could be brought to the council's attention again. But
Right.
it's something that's hard to enforce and monitor.
I understand. I guess I brought it up. I'll speak for myself. It's a legitimate concern about the park. I hear people when they complain about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Anyone else? Okay, hearing none. All in favor? Opposed? Opposed. Okay, I'm going to take a roll call vote. Ms. Fraschich.
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes,
Mr. Butler,
Yes.
Mr. Bush,
Yes,
Ms. Reese,
No,
Mr. D'Ambrosia,
Yes.
Mr. Costa,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. So the motion carries. 8 yes and 1 nay. Mr. McDonald? No.
It was 7-1.
I'm sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, yes. Sorry. Motion carried, 7-1. The next item of business is
that would be.
item number 5, public informational meeting, town council recommendation, and development plan review. Project name Duffy Funeral Home, applicant owner Menden Holdings LLC,
No,
address 757 Menden Road, plat 16 lot 893. Petitioner requests a positive recommendation to the town council to rezone the property from R1 residential to C1 commercial and development plan review approval to construct a crematorium. Mr. Modica. Oh, it's Mr. Stevens.
Milton. Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
members of the planning board. The before you is request for recommendation for a rezoning of AP 16 lot 2893 from residential 1 to commercial 1. The site is is owned by Mendon Holdings, and it's the location of the J.J. Duffy Funeral Home. The funeral home is an existing non-conforming use on this residential property. The applicant is requesting, first of all, administrative subdivision. There is, it's presently, I think, a little bit more than 6 acres, and they're looking to create a new lot which will contain the Duffy Funeral Home on 2.42 of those acres. And the reason it would be an administrative, because they'd merge the back of that lot with an abutting lot, so that that lot would remain residential. So you're being asked to make a recommendation to the town council for the rezone and for relief from the zoning code. So that, again, they're looking to rezone the new lot 893, which would contain the Duffy Funeral Home from residential 1 to commercial. They're also asking that the funeral home be allowed by right, because in a commercial zone, it is required by special use permit, and they're seeking to avoid having to go to the zoning board for that relief. They're also going to be requesting from the council relief from the maximum lot coverage. They will, where a C1 zone has a maximum lot coverage of 40%, they'd be looking for 73%. And they'd also be looking for relief from the zoning board, from the town council, from the 40-foot buffer that's required between R1 zones and C1 zones. So right now it's residential, and if it's changed, it will be commercial. And so you have a difference between C and R, which requires the 40-foot buffer. They're looking to develop a crematorium in the rear of the property. And this would require development plan review approval from the planning board. It's in the application, it's a 40 by 70 foot single story building in the rear, although I think there's a conflict with the site plan. So that needs to be cleared up. This would also be a retroactive approval in regard to a parking expansion that took place in 2019. In April 2019, Mendon Holdings installed an asphalt surface over an area of compacted soil, which may have functioned as a excess parking, but what they did is they resurfaced this parking area, adding 19,000 square feet and adding 63 new striped spaces. So now the total asphalt service parking capacity was increased from 80 to 146 spaces. According to the zoning, land disturbance of 10,000 square feet or creating 25 parking spaces in addition requires or triggers a development plan review. And this was not done. This improvement also violated the zoning ordinance. A development plan review application was not submitted to the planning department. No stamped engineering site plans, stormwater calculations, state permits, or other documentation relating to the physical impacts of the project have been submitted. And on February 22nd, 2022, a stamped plan by a professional land surveyor, but not a professional engineer, was submitted to the town. So this also violates the landscaping ordinance. So within new parking areas, one shade tree is required for every 10 spaces, or for every 20 spaces, a landscaped island. The new lot area has no interior landscaping at all, and neither does the original area, parking area, which probably dates back to when the building was developed in the late 80s. We provided you with an expert opinion from Clark University geography professor John Rogan, who happens to be doing some consulting work for the town on other projects. He described the J.J. Duffy site as a heat island, which during the typical summer period has an ambient air temperature of 90 degrees and a surface temperature of 120 degrees. He states that the Duffy site causes heat stress to properties located within 320 feet of the property. By planting just 14 shade trees within the entire parking area, it would cool the ambient air temperature by 5 degrees. In addition to this deficiency, the plan that's been submitted shows the holding pond that's on the property. It is on 2 lots. And with the administrative subdivision requested, there's an opportunity to reconcile that, to put it on 1 lot, which would be the new J.J. Duffy lot. There's also a shed, which appears to be less than 10 feet from the property line, which is a violation of the zoning code. There's some other minor things that I'm not going to speak to tonight, but are in the recommendation. So the department's recommendation is that the department has no objection to the rezoning of the new Duffy lot from R1 to C1. As long as that use be restricted to that of a funeral home. A standalone crematorium building as specified on the site plan is also not objectionable. In fact, it's appropriate given the trends in this business. The department's position is that the new zoning as proposed is not in conflict with the land use element of the comp plan. The future land use map shows Duffy site is institutional and the balance of the lot is medium density residential. So this would be in character with this site and the surrounding properties. Assuming the council sees its way clear to grant a rezoning of the Duffy lot, the council has the authority to require the entire parking lot to have landscape islands and the department would recommend that the shade trees be the preferred interior landscaping option, as it provides a wider canopy. And this would only be 14 shade trees distributed spatially within the entire parking area. The department recommends forwarding favorable recommendation to the town council of the following conditions. The parcel is to be subdivided by administrative subdivision. The new lot, the J.J. Duffy lot, be limited to a funeral home use only. The landscape islands with shade trees be installed in the entire J.J. Duffy's parking area, consistent with zoning ordinance, Article 14D2, and the Land Development Subdivision Regulations, Article 8-A. A landscape plan prepared by a registered landscape architect shall be submitted to the planning department for approval. The landscape plan shall show the entire parked area incorporating landscape islands planted with shade trees. The landscape plan shall be recorded in the land evidence record. And the issuance of building permits should be contingent on implementation of the plan. Then finally, holding pond should be, it's an existing non-conforming development, and the rezoning should be conditioned upon the pond being on the new lot 893. The department has met a number of times with the applicant's attorney and met with the applicant on site. The department has expressed an interest in working with, and we always like to get to yes. And in this case, a landscape plan as requested by the department was not forthcoming. And so, again, the department has a strong feeling of support for the crematorium, but it is only reasonable to reconcile all these outstanding violations. And considering that the town is planting 200 trees in Valley Falls to try and reverse the trend towards a climate problem in this, especially in these urbanized areas, it's good policy as well as appropriate in this case. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Board, have any questions? Mr. McDonald?
What did you say about the landscape plan in a department that it doesn't see a plan forthcoming?
We have not, we've asked for a landscape plan and there has been no landscape plan forthcoming. We don't have engineered drawings or engineered site plans. We only have plans that were developed by a landscape, I'm sorry, a surveyor. So we have a number of questions that in regard to your approval of a development plan review that we can't answer.
So is the hook that the building permit won't be issued without a plan?
I think the department's position is to forward a favorable recommendation for the rezoning on condition that it is use be restricted to a funeral home, but that this the conditions that I mentioned have to be also stipulated by the council, and you have to approve the development plan no matter what.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Partington?
Good evening, members of the planning board, and we had a lengthy hearing just now, so I don't want to waste any time. I even made notes this time, but I have to make two very brief observations about the matter that just came before you. The first is that I've never, in 35 plus years of doing this work, had an objector hug me. Never. And secondly, just think of how much time you guys would have saved in statements for the Blackstone Valley Prep hearing if you would have known the word believe it. That would have gone a lot quicker. First of all, I also, as I've done several times in the last few months, thank you guys for the extra time you've put in. I know that it's been a long few months and a long year, actually, 22 for you guys. I also wanted to thank the planning department for putting us on this meeting. Also, as Mr. Stevens said, that there has been a lot of discussion, and I know Mr. McDonald had asked a question about the lack of information, and I hope to address that hopefully to your satisfaction, or at least to a point where we can move forward in some way. Also, I appreciate, as do my clients, the support, the general support for the crematorium, and also the fact and the acknowledgement that it does comport with the comprehensive plan and with the 2035 future land use map. Also to cut to a lot of the chase, hopefully, the preconditions or the conditions to your approval, as I read in the staff report, 5 out of 6 are fine. We have no problem with the lot line adjustments. We have no problem. The shed's going to go. We have no problem. Again, I think I just said the holding pond. That's all the things are going to be addressed. The trash, John, all that stuff's going to be addressed. Our issue has been from the very beginning has been with the issue of the planting of the trees. And also, if I could, just for purposes of understanding this, it's my understanding that by filing for a zone change or applying for a zone change, that is what triggers, at least for my purposes, before the staff report, is that triggers development plan review. In development plan review, as Mr. Stevens has indicated, is also appropriate in cases where there has been an increase in 25 spaces, which was done previously in 2019, which I'll address in a moment. But my understanding is also that it's advisory. So, but even in an advisory capacity, is it safe to say that Article 8 of the subdivision regulations with respect to site, design, and application are going to be considered? The reason why I ask it is because, I mean, technically, I feel like I'm here for development plan review, and Mr. Stevens made a comment about, well, you have to approve development plan review. And I think the solicitor and I have had this discussion before in other matters about
Well,
this being advisory.
so Mr. Stevens brought up development plan review tonight.
Right.
Typically, if the owner had wanted to add 25 spaces or more, you would typically go through development plan review, which is not advisory. It's based on specific and objective criteria, which is outlined in the
Section 8.
ordinance and or regulations.
Right.
So if what you're asking, I think I understand what you're asking.
Right.
Development plan review can also come with a recommendation to another board, i.e. the zoning board or the town council. But I think what Mr. Stevens is saying, and he can speak for himself, is that typically if the owner had wanted to add the 25 spaces, whenever that was, they would have come to the planning board and gone to this board for at least development plan review.
Right. And so in other words, so with this, and if again, I don't want to speak for the town on this, but so I think, Mr. Stevens, if I understand you, that in an attempt to remedy that situation, we're putting this all together, and that your suggestions to go to the council are going to hopefully remedy what you feel has been the failure to go to development plan review previously, correct? If you got that. In other words, are we coming back here for development plan review at some point is my question. If we go to the town council, regardless of what the outcome is here, are we coming back for development plan review?
Well, I mean, I heard two different things from Mr. Stevens tonight. One was before the building permit, the landscape plan would be approved by the planning department.
Okay.
And then I heard that development plan review would be approved by this board. I mean, like I said, if they had done it frankly correctly, they would have been before this board with an actual application and an approval. So I mean, I don't really, I mean, we're talking about some trees.
Yeah,
So-
I guess my, my,
Well,
posi-
we're talking, well,
our-
we're talking about trees, and I understand that, but we're also talking, and again, I want to address this, and this is not, I'm not trying to be contentious on it. I'm just, if I just want to make sure, I just want to get my procedure down about what
Yeah,
we're doing. That's
so-
all.
so
That's
let-
all.
Let me fill you in then. So, yeah, I think we're asking the council, our recommendation is for the planning board to recommend to the council the conditions that I stated, the spatial distribution of trees within parking. But then, no, you have to come back for development plan review for the crematorium and then to reconcile the additional parking because there are requirements that include engineered plans, drainage, the usual.
Right. That's all I was asking, Mr.
Yeah.
Stevens, and I appreciate that. I just, that's why when you say we're just talking about trees, we're talking about a lot more than that. If you're talking about coming back for development plan review with engineered site plans and whatnot. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Well, you're saying that we're just talking about trees.
No, Kelly Morrison. I mean, Kelly Salvatore. excuse me.
But you're right, yes.
So there's, I can't dispute the fact that there was a gravel, a packed gravel section of the J.J. Duffy Funeral Home that had been used for parking all along. My understanding, and Mr. Bernardo, who is no longer the owner of that business, is here tonight. Back in the 80s, Mr. Bernardo installed at a great cost a very, I would imagine, again, there's nothing before you in expert testimony tonight, and that would have to go to the engineered plans, but a very efficient drainage system with at a great cost to, in order to accommodate what he hoped to be a future asphalting of that back area. And again, always used for parking. At the time he did it, the budget didn't call, his budget didn't support the asphalting of that back area. So many years later, in 2019 or thereabouts, he went out, he hired a reputable contractor at substantial cost and asphalted that back area. And by the way, the town has never, no one in the planning department or anyone has ever said that this was done intentionally to get around any kind of regulation. That's never been alleged by Mr. Stevens or anyone else. So I want to make that clear. But by the same token, it's certainly if Mr. Bernardo would have known that that was a requirement at the time, he would have done it. And, you know, I would have hoped that the contractor at that time would have known and would have taken the appropriate steps to get the right approvals. So now the Bernardos are now stuck with a situation where they've got parking. And if any of you have ever attended funerals, and I hope not too many, unfortunately, the older I get, the more I attend, you'll know that those parking spaces are all needed. And that's really what the essence is of what the back and forth has been. I can't contest with the town what the requirements are. I can't, with respect to development planning review or the site regulations that are attached to that in the land development regulations. What I can do, I guess, at some point is come forward and request a waiver of some of the requirements. And that's one of the reasons also why I had asked a solicitor, and I probably should have contacted her earlier about that. But I really didn't get a chance to think about all this until I got the staff report, which, thanks for getting it out, Mr. Stevens. So this has all come to mind. I mean, if I'm at a point now where I would like to come to the board under the appropriate circumstances and make a case for not having to put 14 trees in that lot, is what I'm really getting at. And I will also, let me just say this too, and I realize this is an administrative situation, but with all due respect, and I don't know Professor Rogan, okay? And certainly I don't believe that Mr. Stevens had any intention here of making any misrepresentations about anything. He went to someone who he determined to be an expert in this and wanted to get an opinion. And I respect that, and I have no problem with that. What I do have a problem with, however, is a couple of paragraphs from someone who doesn't list his qualifications, who doesn't really cite resources. All I've got is this little tiny map. The scope of his review is not here. And then he concludes that this is a danger potentially to the elderly and to young children. I mean, that's kind of a stretch, and I really hope you discount that. I mean, this is an administrative proceeding, but this wouldn't even get to the front steps in a courtroom. So I really, you know, unless Mr. Rogan or Professor Rogan wants to come down and testify to this. And by the way, if that's true, then we should all get a caravan together and stop moving out of town. Because if you go down Mendon Road, and I thought about it today, let's start at the northern end. Right at the northern end, once you get past Route 99, let's start out with the Benny's Plaza, St. John's, Navigant, Chops, Ciabra Plaza, Adeline's Plaza, the Planet Fitness Plaza, and the adjoining plaza. Down the bottom of Angel Road, And you keep going down and you have, again, these large swaths of asphalt across some Davenports. Down, you go down farther, you go into the Angelos Plaza. These are everywhere. And I'm not saying that Mr. Stevens is happy about any of those things, because I know he's not. But the point is, if we're going to get to the point where we're saying it's a endangerment, then we've all got something to worry about, I would suggest. And I'm sure Mr. D'Ambrosi's got something to add to this. But so my point is that what these people run a great business, and if you buy that property, it's immaculate. It's beautifully manicured, and they do a great business. And unfortunately, there's a lot of business for that right now. And I've been to many funerals there and wakes that they utilize every one of those spaces. And believe me, for all the resistance to this, and that's probably the wrong word to use, my clients do appreciate that the fact that Mr. Stevens has gone out there, he took his time, he came down. The solicitor as well has afforded me many discussions on this. We don't take that lightly, believe me. But, you know, and it's very hard, I'm sure, you know, it's hard when to tell someone that, you know, well, if the guy down the street doesn't have to do it, why do I have to do it? And Mr. Stevens' response to that as well, when they come to me for relief, I'm going to straighten that out as well. I'm sure that's what he would say. And I understand that, but it's hard to tell someone who's in business and who's spending a lot of money to improve their property. It's hard to tell them, well, you know, that's the way the rules are. So now that you're trying to do this to improve your property, you have to add this on, you have to make these changes. So at the very least, I guess what I would like to do is in light of this development plan review situation, what I initially had wanted to do, like in most cases for a zone change, was come here and get an advisory on this. So if development plan review is going to be triggered in the sense that now we're going beyond the simple application for a change of zone into now the parking spaces that were added to, then in development plan review is going to be involved. It may not be a bad idea to do everything at once, because what I would do is I would come in and I would make my pitch with a drainage plan and maybe with an engineered site plan for a waiver from those requirements. So I'm throwing that out there because at this point, I don't dispute anything that what Mr. Stevens has said, nor do the Bernados, about what transpired in the past. It was not done intentionally, but it was done out of a need. And it was done at a parking area that had been used in that way since the late 80s.
Can I just ask a quick question? What's the specific reason for not wanting to plant the tree? I can't tell, is it a cost issue, or is it parking spaces would have to be taken away, or would affect the drainage system that was installed? I just don't know what.
No, and that's a fair question. And I think it's not the drainage system. We have complete confidence in the drainage system. That's not it. It is more the fact that all the spaces are needed. They don't want to asphalt any more property up there. They get that, okay? And Mr. Stevens offered us a couple of reasonable alternatives, I thought. But again, it would involve giving up some spaces there. And that's been the basic. Cost is always an issue. And again, you know, as a board, you say, well, look, we might not disagree with anything you're saying about what has transpired in other properties. However, this is before us now. And I get that as well. But again, I just ask you to consider that there is that aspect of it that is very hard. It's the human part of it that says, well, wait a minute. You know, I'm looking at Mendon Road and all I'm seeing is black. You know, and now I've improved my property. I keep it immaculately manicured. And now I've got to put in these trees, and I'm potentially endangering children and elderly by not doing it. So, you know, that's who we are. And certainly we certainly don't want to damage the health of anyone.
I could be wrong on this, but I'm fairly certain that when O'Neill Funeral Home came to us and wanted to expand their parking, that we required them to put the islands and the trees in their expanded parking lot. And it looks really nice, number one, but I mean, it's not without credit. I mean, we have had a very similar situation. I mean, they had keys that then come back later and ask for forgiveness, but I mean, we wanted to take down the woods and expand the parking lot pretty significantly, and we required they.
What we did, and
the landscape.
as a matter of fact, Mr. Butler, I've been up there several times, again, for not good reasons. And we have discussed that. And as a matter of fact, I believe I discussed that with the solicitor, who I think might have been the planner at that time. I'm not sure. Yeah. And the configuration is a little bit different, obviously. But I mean, if you look at that, and I was actually there this morning for another reason. And it's, I mean, if you, I didn't count the spaces, Mr. Butler, but I mean, there are these little areas that jut out. And granted, I would venture to say that the vast majority of what you see in the way of landscaping is when you first pull in that area that separates the entrance from the exit. Other than that island that's there, there's not a whole lot. And again, I can't dispute the fact that there is some landscaping on that lot. Yeah, there is.
Okay, so I see it as having to really reconfiguring this entire parking lot. You probably have to redesign the entire parking lot if you're going to put trees and islands and all
Yes.
of that, right?
Yes.
Which is not the case of the O'Neills because they were expanding and extending. It's two different, in my mind.
No.
This is done, but the other
Right.
one was going to be.
Right. And
Can we do trees in the back? Around the aisle, in the back, there are trees there already, but, I
45
don't know,
trees
40.
actually were put in.
yeah. I just think it's, nothing that I don't have anything against trees, but in a sense I do because the maintenance. But, I think this would be a lot of costs, a lot of reconfiguration, and a lot of effort if we could plant the trees somewhere else. I know it looks gray, but it's been gray now for a long time. Too bad, you
Mr.
know, we let it
D'Ambrosi's
go.
chomping at the bit over here.
It's gray. I'm done.
So I respectfully disagree with what you're saying. Whether it was done intentionally or not, the fact of the matter is there are regulations that everybody is supposed to be upheld to. And the defense that, well, look at this guy, he's got asphalt, and this guy, like you said yourself, when those folks come to us, they're gonna have to rectify that situation. Right?
Well, they may, and I don't know how many of those folks within recent years have not had to do that.
They
I mean,
have.
I've seen a
No.
lot of pretty freshly laid asphalt up and down. I know that Chops did it, and sorry, Charlie, if you're listening, Lambros. But that was done a while ago, within the last, I believe within the last 10 years it was done.
Right,
I
but I
believe-
believe that there's a difference between a maintenance repaving and an expansion of a parking lot.
Well, but it wasn't a physical expansion of the parking lot. No, that, you're right. Oh, I
It
see
was
what
a
you're saying. Right. I
formalization.
know what you're saying. Right, yeah.
So, I mean,
But the fact remains that, again, and it's only a portion of it, Mr. D'Ambrosio. I understand that there's a substantive part of it legally. Okay, but there's also, again, it's very difficult, and I guess that's more my job than yours, but convincing a client that, well, you can't really look at it that way. You can't really say just because the guy or everybody else up the road doesn't have to do it. It's very difficult to transmit that. That's all I'm saying is that it is a component, maybe not a substantive one, but it's a component.
no, I mean, it comes down to the fact that there's a
Yeah.
right way to do it. And there's talking yourself into maybe not doing it the right way. I mean, I think that, so you're basically looking to not submit any sort of landscape plan to rectify the situation as a part of the oncoming plans for the crematorium, is that correct?
As of this date, the clients have been reluctant to do so. That's correct. I don't think, and again, I don't know, I know Mr. Stevens, he said that, you know, he wants to try to get to yes, and he has made every effort to do that. And I don't know if there's any room left for compromise from my clients. I know they're here. I know Mr. Bernard, I think, wants to speak with the chair's permission. But also, again, you know, I've had situations with this board where and that not quite the same situation, but I mean, off the top of my head, the only one I can think of specifically was, and it was an industrial road. It was on industrial road rather, where there was a waiver of the islands, the trees, and in a parking lot that serviced an office. That was done. So there is precedent for waivers in this type of situation. So yeah, there are regulations and there are variances in the zoning ordinance. There are special use permits in the zoning ordinance. There are waivers in the land development and subdivision regulations. And I think that, again, that's why I raised the question at the outset about procedurally and whether if it was going to, I would prefer it'll be, I guess, wrapped into one, because if in fact we get, you know, if the recommendation here is, well, we can give you a recommendation, a positive one, but you got to go to the council with all of these items, you know, with these conditions, most of which we have no problem with, then you've got to come back for development plan review. I mean, I don't know, maybe it's better off to do the first phase of that before going to the council. I don't know. Again, we're very fortunate in that the planning department has expressed very strongly that they don't have an objection to it, which the glass is certainly more than half full in that respect. And we certainly appreciate that support.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Stevens.
I want to be clear that the department cannot support this rezone unless these shade trees are included in the project. And when this increase of 63 spaces, there were 83, I'm sorry, there were 80. They added 63, to a total of 146. And there was no development plan review, it was just done. There was no trees that were supposed to be put in. And in regard to you know, Rogan's credentials and professor of geography at Clark, they are part of our grant to plant trees through the National Forest Service. So he and his students have been poring over this part of town for the last year. And he's very familiar with, I mean, he's a GIS expert, and so that's his business. So while he was working with the town, I said, can we take a case study here? And that's where this emanated from. And, you know, to justify not going by the regulations, which are not the most strict in the state.
But I didn't say that, John.
Excuse me. They're not very strict. They date back a number of years, maybe to 2005. And to say that it's okay because there's a string of other asphalt lots up and down Mendon Road, that justifies not going by the regulations, especially when the town is expending lots of time and energy to rectify a serious climate situation in this urbanized area. I mean, it's just bad policy. And I think any developer who's coming in for a rezoning has to go to the council. It's entirely appropriate for the council to say, fine, then we can impose reasonable stipulations on that. So I think I want to be clear that regardless of and it's been a goodwill conversation. You know, it's been constructive, but the applicants just, I think, being very stubborn. We need the parking, but there's no documentation. I'll turn Scott's words on him via the BVP? Where's the justification? Where's the economic impact? You know, it's just, you have to take it at face value that we didn't know, we paved, we didn't mean it. That was 3 years ago. We still don't have any engineering, and we will not put a landscape architect in on this case in order to at least try and meet the town, the staff's concerns even halfway. It's like, no, we're going to go for it. I just don't think that's a good thing to support.
Well, first of all, I mean, with all due respect, I mean, I think anyone that's lived in this town, we don't have to justify why the parking's needed. And anyone's been by Duffy's funeral home knows why the parking's needed. So, but again, I was very careful to say that I did not dispute what the regulations said. And I was also very careful to say that substantively, the idea that everyone else up and down the street didn't have to do it or hasn't done it is only one small component, which is not substantive perhaps. All I'm saying is that, again, I didn't know Mr. Rogan or Professor Rogan's qualifications. All I was saying as an advocate was that to make a statement that the failure to do this, now we're crossing beyond landscaping. We're going beyond site design at this point, Mr. D'Ambrosia. Now we're going into, if you don't do this, you now jeopardize people's health. That's a new one on me. Now, I'm not an expert.
Sorry, I have to interrupt you. Only because you specifically pointed that out in the memo and told us not to use that and to consider it, but you keep repeating it.
Well, what are you talking about? What do you mean?
You told us not to consider the health and welfare of the elderly and the children as stated in that paragraph.
No, and that's what I'm saying now.
You keep bringing it up as a point, as it's a frivolous, you're making it a thing. If you don't want us to talk about it, then don't talk about it. You keep bringing it up.
No. Well, Mr. D'Ambrosia, you said to me, you brought up the fact that there were rules, there was a right way and a wrong way to do it.
Right.
And you said that, well, and I was honest and I said to you that I acknowledge that, but that you can't completely discount, if you're going to talk about bad policy or stubbornness or anything else, you can't discount the fact that there is that idea that why are we basically, I'm looking up and down Mendon Road, I don't see this. I am very concerned. And again, I'm bringing up the whole thing about landscaping because now we're going beyond. Article 8 talks about landscape plans and landscaping. For what? Aesthetic purposes? But now we're going beyond that. Now we've interjected into the record the fact that if this is not done, it's a danger. And you're right. I'm saying I think that is nonsense and I think it's very dangerous. And I'm no expert. And I don't know how you got from that the fact that I keep bringing it up. Your planner put that into the record and suggested that if we didn't do this, we would be endangering people. That bothered me. Well, isn't that what he said?
Well, it's not what he said.
For the Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Stevens.
so what he said was because property is distinct heat island, it contributes to elevated air temperature above average for Cumberland within 100 meters or 320 feet radius around the property, which is detrimental to the health and well-being of local residents, especially the young and the elderly, due to heat stress. Also note that air quality is reduced.
Again, I would suggest, I object to all of that being in the record. There's no basis, no foundation legally for that at all.
So you're saying that Professor Rogan is not qualified to be an expert?
I'm saying that this letter doesn't tell me anything about his qualifications, Mr. Stevens. That's what I'm saying.
Well, he has his email address and hit the website.
But I don't have his email address and his website, and I
gave it to you.
Planning board.
I gave it to you in advance of this hearing.
I got this on December 21st. We've been talking about this now for about a year, and I got this.
Yeah, and not getting very far either. So I'd also like to make the point that if you're talking about comparables, that this new lot will be 73% impervious, where the maximum standard in a commercial is 40%. So if you include the asphalt, the new asphalt, the old asphalt, the roof, it's 73% impervious.
Okay.
I mean, this is exceptional.
It is.
And we.
Let's bring this down. Let's bring it down to earth. When you bring it back down to earth, Mr. D'Ambrosia, I wasn't continuing to bring that up. And I don't like to go here with these because I've seen it before and I don't think it's necessary. And I don't like to operate that way. So, John, you've done a lot to try to resolve this, and you know I appreciate that. It is what it is, and I hate that expression, but it is what it is.
My favorite.
Okay? So if it involves, if you want to make the recommendation in accordance, and again, as I've said several times, although I guess my appreciation for the fact that the planning department strongly supports the idea in the building of the crematorium. We certainly can't argue with that. So if we're here for that purpose, and it's a recommendation for the council, as Mr. Stevens has outlined it, I think Mr. Bernardo would like to say a few words. Beyond that, I guess at this point you vote, and we have to come back. If we have to come back for development plan review, we do that.
Well, before he does, I have a few things.
Sure.
I can't speak for the rest of the board, but I don't have an objection to the request for a zone change, okay?
Yep.
And administration of the zoning ordinance and so on. But because we haven't talked about it yet, and I think we need to talk about it, we were discussing, we were going around in circles
Right.
about development plan review.
Right.
Okay. And this is my take on that, okay? Based on the information that was sent to us, we have an elevation and some sections, right? That conflict with the proposed, what has its labeled, the garage of 40 by 70. The dimensions here are 36 by 40, something that can be,
We will rectify
Can
any
be worked-
discrepancies and.
yep, can be worked out.
Absolutely.
Right, no problem with that. okay?
Absolutely.
And some of the things that would come up, and I'm just gonna throw this out there. Normal things that would come up in a development plan review would be signage, which there is some signage, but if there's any additional signage that you need
Right.
for direct parking and so on,
Yep.
okay? Of course, we've been going round and round about the landscape plan, planting islands and so on. I'm hoping that all the parties can get together and come up with some sort of an agreement. With
So
that,
do I.
Okay,
So do I.
but typically with what would come with development plan review would be a lighting plan. Now, I've been to Duffy's a number of times, okay? For obviously reasons that, we're not happy to be there.
Amen. Yep.
Okay. Too often now, more than ever. But I remember their lighting. And I think one of the things that would be included in a development plan review would be a lighting plan for parking and, lighting on the building itself and so on. Well, Duffy's, their main building right now, it's pretty adequate. I would
Yeah.
agree with that. But my hope would be as far as, and it's what we require on any development plan, especially when there's surrounding residences, instead of having high lights that just bleed off the site, small bollards that would just light the
I'm well
footage.
aware. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Things like that. And as far as the crematorium is concerned, there are a few observations that I have with that, okay? And it's stuff that I feel needs to be included as part of a development plan review.
Yep.
Building's fine. Typically, most development plan reviews will show the elevations, the type of materials and so on.
Right.
And in many cases, because it's part of the architect's job, purview, they include a floor plan and so on and so forth. But the one thing that I've noticed here is this building sitting on what appears to be an unpaved area. Okay, and I'm wondering if it should be paved around it and an apron, especially where the garage door is, because, we know what's going to be going in and out of there as frequently as, whatever
Right.
business they have.
That's absolutely fair game and development plan review.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
so there are some details there that, should be incorporated into the
Sure.
plan. So as far as, it's typically what we always request of a development plan review. So I just threw this stuff out here so everybody can think about it, okay? And as far as the detention pond is concerned, my question is this, because we don't know. When that was built, whatever calculations, were there any
Right.
calculations or whatever, where are they? Because now, since you've added more pavement and more impervious area, is that detention basin of adequate size? Okay, so
Well-
we would like to, I would like to. see
No,
it.
and that's something that I knew that if
Yeah.
ultimately for development plan review,
Yeah.
that would be something that would have to be satisfied,
Okay,
obviously. Yeah.
sure. So I can't speak for the rest of the board,
No.
but as far as what the requests are to the town council, they're reasonable, and we can still back and forth the landscaping issues.
Sure.
Okay.
Yep.
So is that
No,
helpful?
I know it's helpful in the sense, and that's why I brought it up at the outset. Okay, normally when I get into a situation, again, this is a little bit out of the ordinary for all the reasons stated tonight. You get a zone change, you say, well, look, this is the property. I'm going to come here first, and depending on what has to be done, maybe there's just a change of use as opposed to structure. So it comes here, and it's just a question of getting the positive advisory or recommendation. It goes to the council, and that's it. In this instance, now you're talking about, well, maybe, there's not only the change itself, and even the structure itself doesn't really trigger any kind of land development project review or anything like that. But the fact of the matter is that by the letter of what the zoning ordinance says, development plan review is triggered by the addition of the 25 spaces. Now, again, they were there, but they were not paved. So there is an additional 25 spaces.
Which means in the same token, and I remember they weren't paved, so you don't have impervious area. So.
Right, no,
obviously, and I've never been aware of, except for maybe a couple, with the gravel area where they make a few little dips and maybe a few little ponding areas. I've never, I'm not aware of any flooding or pond issues of whatsoever there, okay, prior to the additional paving that was there. So I'm hoping that's kind of helpful and somewhat a little bit easier for us to move this along, because I certainly do want to move it along. I want to get this
so do I.
sent to the town council, because if the rest of the board that feels the way I do, is that we have no objection with the zone change, and I think,
What's a good place to start?
well, in my mind,
I mean, but again,
it's totally appropriate, because it shouldn't be residential, okay? It should be the commercial that
Right.
you're requesting.
it
And-
should. I mean, that's what the comprehensive
Yep.
plan
Yep.
indicates.
Yeah.
Again, I just, it seems though that it's gotten contentious as these do at times, but I think that I haven't argued with any of the regulations. I haven't disputed what they say. I haven't disputed what's been done. My main problem was with the letter that I won't speak of, okay, all right? That's my main that was the only problem I raised. So, I mean, I didn't think it needed to rise to this level, and if it has, and if I had anything to do with it, I apologize. I want to bring it back down to earth, and I just want to get something done for these people because they do a great job, they run a good business. And, and again, we started off on the right foot. The town is supportive of this, and that's the best place to start.
So would you prefer to confer with the person who wrote that letter? To get his qualifications and so on?
No, I'm not even gonna, listen, I think it's not even. I think as a I didn't bring this up, you did. As a taxpayer, I'm much more concerned with the fact that, I mean, at some point, if it's this dangerous for all the blacktop that I see, is the only point I was making. I mean, I'm gonna get ready to get out of town. And I say the tongue in cheek, obviously, but you know what I'm saying.
I understand.
And that's what I'm coming from. So well, I mean, look, I think Mr. Stevens, I don't dispute anything he said about, dealing with this individual. John wouldn't have dealt with him if he wasn't qualified. I know that. The point is, as an advocate, now, I'm sure the solicitor can appreciate this, as an advocate, to get something like this and add to the whole idea of landscaping. But again, I don't want to get off track. I'd be glad to address that in any other way possible, but I think that it all comes back to the idea. And I think even if, and I certainly don't want to speak for Mr. Stevens, I've already got myself in enough trouble, but even without Professor Rogan's letter, I don't think that Mr. Stevens would have a different opinion. His opinion would still be, these trees have to be here, based on my discussions with him, which have been several. So, I mean, I guess at the end of the day, does it really matter procedurally or substantively here? Maybe not, at the end of the day.
Mr. Costa?
Mr.
I've
Chairman.
been on this board since the early nineties, when I bought waterfront property and realized that I had to maintain this waterfront property up in the northern part of this city. I am not in a position to want to create any hardship on this family because they want to expand their business.
I understand.
You of all people, I have the utmost respect for you,
Thank
even
you.
though sometimes we don't agree.
Likewise.
Okay, but I still respect you.
Thank you.
And I can't see why you in the planning department can't get into a room, put your gloves on, and one person.
Like, take them off.
Whatever the case may be,
Right.
and come out of the room where you both are happy with what you have discussed. And then come back before us and say, okay, this is what we have. We would have your recommendation, Mr. Bernardo over here can speak his words. Our board would come in with a favorable recommendation. We'd all be happy, we'd all clap, we'd all be smiling. I just can't see. We have had cases before us in years past that
Well-
were worse than this, much worse
Yeah,
than
absolutely,
this.
sure.
But we've been able to come up with
I'm sorry, Mr. Costa.
no, we've been able to come up with an agreement for both parties, both parties were happy. And that's my personal feeling right now.
Yes, so, sure.
My name is Jeff Bernardo. I'm the president, JJ Duffy Funeral Home, co-owner with my brother. JJ Duffy Funeral Home is a legacy business in this town. The Bernardo family cares deeply about this community. Not that we are in a business that requires us to follow every rule morally, ethically, and legally. At no point was anything done to circumvent any rules. What we're asking for is a simple zone change to meet the needs of our community, period. The growing cremation rate, and our parking lot is used to its fullest capacity at all times for services. We also have large truck deliveries during services that require the 18-wheelers to be able to turn around with cars in the lot. And adding those structures will prevent the ease of those trucks being able to turn. Adding in an already developed lot, islands could cause pooling and freezing of water, slip and falls that present a chance for us to go into litigation for slip and falls. Additionally, if we take away parking spots, especially during large services, we're forcing, in the past, because of the gravel lots, we couldn't contain the number of cars in a very tight area now that we can with these added spots. Before, we were pushing families, cars across the street, elderly people crossing a major highway during services, sometimes with police, sometimes without, because you don't know sometimes that some services are going to be bigger than others. While I understand, the lot coverage and all those things, Um, we're just trying to do the right thing for our families and our community, and that's all we're here asking for. As far as adding islands, I just don't see it as a reasonable, I mean, I added 45 plus trees along the edge of the parking lot. They may not be shade trees. I mean, but I'm trying to make it beautiful. I'm trying to make sure that, it's environmentally friendly as it can possibly be. In addition, that back lot, that drainage wasn't added in 2019. That drainage was there in the gravel area. And somewhere along the line in 1988, this town approved those drawings as a parking lot. My father just did not have the funding at that time because he was a small business just trying to make it. And he got to the point where he entered into the retirement portion and he said, I want to leave my kids with what I intended, what I envisioned. And that's what he did before he retired. And we assumed that business in 2019, my brother and I, and we're just trying to grow on my father and my family's legacy. So I ask you to take that into consideration, that I don't know how we move forward here, but I don't think the trees are an important part of this discussion. This was all approved back in 1988. And I don't know how we get those records or if you want to see those records. That was a parking lot, period. It was gravel. It wasn't impervious, but it was a parking lot. The drainage was there. It was approved. There were obviously drainage or plans that were stamped, when that building was built. So again, we want to follow all the rules. We want to do everything the right way. We hired a large company to do that job. And not one point during that time did I'm a funeral director. I'm not a contractor. I don't know what needs to be triggered, what doesn't need to be triggered. I just relied on the people who are professionals to do their job, just like families do with me. So that's really all I have to say. And I appreciate your time. I appreciate you listening to me. I appreciate all the hard work that the planning department has put into this. But again, that's all we're looking to do is do right by our community, do right by our families, control the custody from the minute they call us to the minute we, hand them their loved ones' remains at the end of their services with us. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. McDonald.
I'm sorry, Mr. McDonald.
No, wait, I can wait. I thought you were done.
The what?
He can wait.
I can wait. I
Oh,
thought
no,
you
I
were
just,
finished.
Dennis Bernard, I just wanted to say a couple of things, and if it's okay with the board, and with Mr. Kuchar, he's asked to address the board. Dennis?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. My name is Dennis Bernardo. I live at 171 Old Mendon Road, the closest abutter to the property in question. I'm the former owner and father to two excellent young men. One thing I'd like to correct that Jeff said, they didn't take it over, they paid for it. That happened to me years ago, when you took over your father's business, and and everybody thinks, oh, you just give it to you. No, the boys are paying for it. Anyway, I would like to, there were a few misstatements made this evening that I'd like to correct for you. The one that stands out the most, and it is not picking on Mr. Stevens at all, but regarding drainage plans and that kind of thing. The drainage plan, I was a member of the Cumberland Zoning Board of Review for 10 years in the 80s. The last 2 years as chairman. Because of that, I was forced to go to the town council for relief to build and develop that property. I tried to go to the zoning board, but there was a conflict of interest, obviously. So we had to do it the hard way. I presented all the engineered plans to the building inspector at the time and to the town council of the time. And after due consideration, they authorized the development of that property. A couple of points I need to make, but one of the things that's not mentioned here today for any reason, and Jeff kind of mentioned it about the trees and the maybe slip and falls and that kind of thing. But I left the Broad Street location right across from the development that you're talking about earlier tonight. And that was a parking lot of 22 cars. For a funeral, we could squeeze 29 in. Everybody else went to St. Patrick's parking lot. And I always worried about people crossing Marshall Avenue, Broad Street. I grew up there, I should know. So that was always a problem. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to get out of there. But as things developed at the new funeral home, we started getting more and more people, bigger funerals, and people were going into the neighborhood on Sunset across the way. And then again, we had to hire police. And the way things are, many times we couldn't get an officer to come. Couldn't have one there. So we had men out there with flashlights, trying to be sure that no one was injured. So safety is paramount in our endeavors. We want everyone safe. Safety is a key word here. Regarding tree planting in the middle of the parking lot, with the advent of new deliveries, bigger trucks coming in, we've got 18-wheelers coming in. They're not going to make the turns and get in and deliver what they need to deliver. And we certainly don't want to take caskets off a truck in the driveway and roll them back into the funeral home. That's not the way it's done. It doesn't look good. It's not appropriate. It's not dignified. But I could see nothing there that you try to squeeze a truck in and they'll be injuring the trees that we're trying to plant and probably destroying. I can envision the curbing and the islands and all that. I mean, they're going to get destroyed. They're going to get plowed. They're going to get, it's going to be a mess. And we like things done properly. That's our problem. But anyway, that's my biggest concern is going to be safety. And I advise them to do everything you can and just hope for the best. I mean, J.J. Duffy is the second oldest continuing operating business in the town of Cumberland. Only surpassed by Alien Manufacturing, which is pre-Civil War. And we're proud of that. That's why my name isn't on the building. I want J.J. Duffy to live forever. And there will only ever be a funeral home there. Thank you.
Thank you. When was it?
Thanks for that.
Was Mr. McDonald?
Indulgent, Mr. McDonald, yes.
And then. That's fine.
Mrs. Salvatore? I'm looking at page 3. Mrs. Stevens' memo. The 7-pager for this application. And it's zoning ordinance 14D2. And it requires parking lots to include a shade tree, et cetera. And then below the graphics, there's a sentence, Cumberland zoning ordinance requires shade trees and landscaped islands within parking lots to help mitigate the adverse health, air quality, and heat generating aspects, et cetera. Is that language in the ordinance?
It says no.
Okay.
No.
The ordinance itself does in fact require the shade trees that are listed in the first paragraph. Is that correct?
Yes, I just.
Okay.
It requires shade trees or landscape islands. One
Okay.
shade tree per 10 spaces or a landscape island every 20
Every 20.
spaces.
Am I correct in assuming that the genesis of this application was essentially the building of a crematorium?
I think so.
Yeah,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, okay. I'm looking at this. And we're really down to trees is what we're down to. And I understand the economic impact, negative impact on the business and having to give up parking spaces for trees. But I'm looking at the entire package, getting a zone change to C1 from R1. The paving, where the impervious surface is at 73%. The willingness to waive, to move a shed, the willingness to allow the building of the crematorium. There are a couple of other issues.
To also keep it the same, I'm going to interrupt Mr. McDonald, but also to keep it, it's only going to be a funeral home. It's restricted to that use on top of that.
Okay. But my point is, the town is asking for the installation of shade trees. And it is agreeing to waiving essentially a plethora of stuff to allow this crematorium to be built. And it strikes me unreasonable. I get the economic impact, the adverse economic impact. It just seems unreasonable that they're not willing to meet the town, not even halfway, 20% of the way. And the ordinance is the ordinance. We can talk about chops and everything else. If my position is, if they were to come to this board because they wanted to do something requiring them to come to this board to institute some type of land development project, and this issue of trees came up, my position would be the same. And I mean, my frustration, once in a while, we hear arguments about whataboutism. And perhaps at times it has merit, but I just don't see it here. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I could echo a little bit on that, is the department had asked the applicant for a landscape architect, so you make sweeping statements about trucks not being able to navigate or slip and falls. In my mind, it's all about the design. It's all about, okay, you have 2.5 acres, 73% impervious. Most of that is parking. I mean, can we just take the first step towards what my old boss, Link Chafee, used to say, supposing we were going to put in 10 trees, or
John,
we never, ever got to that point. They absolutely refused to discuss putting any trees in. So I don't know what we can do. Well, if that's their case, I agree with Mr. Costa. We can go into a room and try and figure it out. I probably should before it even got to this board. And considering they're coming in for a zone change, and the council can frankly demand anything they want from any applicant who wants a petitioner who wants a zone change. And you speak about these waivers. So if they're not willing to make, if it's off the table, then I mean, that says it all.
well, but again, if I just could, there was a discussion about, and this actually was a suggestion from Mr. Stevens, that when we talked about the spaces, Mr. Stevens even talked about some trees along the side and even adding a couple of spaces, I believe. The point is that there was some talk about trees as far as they did engage a landscape architect for a period of time. That was done. A landscape plan was not presented. There was there was a discussion about some additional trees. The question was how many and where.
And,
So-
and if I could, there was another, one suggestion was, what if you amended the boundary so that you could create a little bit more parking to offset the parking you would lose by adding 14 trees? I mean, let's talk. Let's figure it out.
Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Butler.
That's my feeling is I understand the vague hardships. And my family has used Duffy's. They're excellent. They're a wonderful business. Treated my family with the utmost respect and care. So I want them to succeed. I want them to, unfortunately, bury many more of my family members, but I also want to be fair to the town, and I want to understand the hardship, and I still don't understand, because there is no landscape plan. Are we talking about if we put in these islands, we're going to lose 50 parking spaces? Well, to me, that would be unreasonable, and I would say, well, no, absolutely, you can't take 50. Is it 10 parking spaces? Is it? Show me on a plan where the trucks come in and how you could configure the island. If we had something in front, and I know that that would come at a cost to the Bernados, and I am cognizant of that, but it feels like a small step to take to at least say a landscape architect looked at it, came up with the best possible plan, and you know what, in my professional opinion as a landscape architect, we can't meet the zoning regulations as it's written, but we could do this would be the compromise. And I agree with Mr. Costa. We're always encouraging people to compromise, and Mr. Stevens are always willing to compromise. It's just hard to compromise if we don't know what we're compromising on. And I would like more of a sense of, okay, how many parking spaces are we talking about? What kind of interior circulation issues would arise because we're putting in these things? And again, I know that comes at a cost to the applicants, and I feel bad about that, but I don't know how else we get beyond it until there's something, even if it's not a full plan, it's just a landscape architect goes out and looks at it and develops a memo that says, this is what we see and what's possible or why it's not possible.
I guess that my client had a question.
Mr. Stevens, I just, would you be does the plan have to have islands in the lot, in the center of the lot? Is that what you're asking for? Because that's my concern. If we want to put trees around the edge that shade over the side of the lot, that's fine. I don't see a problem with that, but it's installing a lot in a brand new paved lot. There's no way you're going to get irrigation to it without ripping up the entire lot, causing, we'd have to be out there with buckets watering the tree every day during the summer, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to add it into the center of the lot. I am totally not opposed to adding trees along the border of the lot. We've offered a couple of scenarios where that is, but the sticking point was where we had to put islands. We can't put islands in the middle of that lot for functional reasons and for practical reasons. So
That's just this, if I may, then I had said something to Mr. Bernardo as Mr. Costa was speaking. I turned to Mr. Bernardo, I said, look, because I've been in front of this board enough times to get the feeling of what's happening. And so I said, look, would you have objection to tabling this, even if it gets us no further? I think that the board, again, we're the same place that Mr. Stevens was. He's saying, look, I'm all for this, but there's got to be, I've got to see something on the other side. And it sounds to me like the planning board is at the same situation. So now that we've aired some of this, and I'm glad that the Bernardos got to speak, and perhaps, again, perhaps, if one tabling maybe could get something done, or at least get us on the road to getting something done, or maybe not at all. And it comes back to you and we said we haven't moved at all, and you make your decision. I think before we go there, I think I would like at least to give it a shot. Mr. Bernardo has suggested that he'd be willing to discuss some alternatives. So, I mean, we're willing to put that on the table.
And you've been before us enough times to know what what is recommended in an application. You know,
Yes,
that.
yes.
That's, I mean, you don't even have to think about it.
No,
So, like I said, if anybody can do it, Mr. Pynton, it would be you.
well, thank you. Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah.
So get together with the white-haired guy over there and it's like.
Yeah, I mean, you know,
Well, this was advertised as a public informational meeting, okay? That's what it
correct.
says here.
That's correct.
This is my feeling. I can't speak for the rest of the board. I don't want you to have to come back for another public informational meeting. You guys can hammer this stuff out. You just come back with,
No, yeah, that's a good point, actually. I don't know how the town, I mean, yeah, that's a good point. And then we can do to shortcut this. And you know, a lot of time has gone by and I just, to the extent that it matters, because a lot's been discussed, and I understand how what the planning board's getting really the first up close look at this. So I can understand the planning board saying, well, you know, I mean, it doesn't look like there's been any movement anywhere. What's going on here? I can say that the last year has not been wasted. There's been a lot of discussion. And so, I mean, hopefully there can be some meeting, and if it can be, I don't know procedurally if the town is willing to, at that point, perhaps we can just shortcut the process if in fact something can be agreed to.
well, for me, my personal,
it's not a
my
good- it's a
personal
good
opinion is
suggestion.
this. Have you come back for another public informational meeting is a waste of your time and ours, okay? And no more special meetings.
Yeah, I wouldn't even, right.
You know, if you guys, if we can get this thing hammered out where you think you've got something that the board's gonna be happy with, then let's not come back for a public informational meeting. Let's just go.
Matter of fact,
You got my vote. Well, that's something I didn't even think about.
Sure.
Didn't even think about.
What? Everybody.
What trees that
That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
I mean, it isn't a public informational meeting, so.
Right.
We wouldn't be taking any action on it. Right? Am I correct? As a public informational meeting?
Re-advertise, right.
But for another,
I don't-
for another public informational meeting?
I don't see how I believe as much as I agree with what you said,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I kind of, I agree with the solicitor that I don't see how we get around that because it is a necessary step, right?
That's my,
Well, can we do,
that's my question is,
Well, can we do this?
it's like coming for pre-application.
well, you
Okay.
can continue it to a date certain,
Yeah.
and then I can look at it and
Right.
decide whether or
That-
not.
That's what I was going to
I'm,
suggest.
I don't know about the rest of the board. I'm okay with that.
That's what I was going to suggest. Thank you.
I'm not trying to,
Salvatore.
I'm not trying to jump ahead a step, but if a public informational meeting wasn't necessary in the first place, you could have come to us with a
Right.
development plan review off
Exactly.
the bat and so on and so forth, and we would be at that point.
As I've done several times, I've
Yeah.
put them together, right?
Okay, so I guess what we'll do is we'll continue it, okay? And they're gonna look at it as far as whether you has to be posted, advertised again as a public informational meeting, or we can just move forward, correct?
Yeah,
I'm okay with that.
I'll make a motion to continue.
if the board's okay with it,
Okay,
obviously.
Mr. Costa,
Regarding Duffy Funeral Home, Mendon Holdings at 757 Mendon Road. Applicant Mendon Holdings LLC, I make a motion that we table this item until February 23rd.
I have a motion by Mr. Costa. Do I have a second? Second by, Mr. Bush. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Thank you.
Opposed?
Thank you
Ayes-
very much,
Ayes
guys.
have it, motion carries.
Mr. Bush, it always is.
Yes. Oh, yeah. We do have to do a section on public comment. There's nobody here for public comment.
We have 3 people in the queue. If anyone of the attendees on Zoom wants to speak, please click the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen. There's no one raising their hand, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Motion adjourned by Mr. Bush, seconded by the entire board. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it.